نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Once again, welcome, and the speakers are all very busy people, but thank you for joining us. And everyone else, I see that we have about 45 or so participants here. What we're discussing in a socially distanced way is something that's extremely important, whose human and economic cost will be with us for a few years. Just let's look at the numbers until last night. There's more than 2 million people infected all over the world. 130,000 people, nearly 130,000 people have passed away directly because of the virus. There could be many, it's not totally not detected to the virus. There are 4 countries in the world, and they all happen to be rather advanced countries in an economic sense, where deaths have passed 15,000. Unfortunately, UK may be joining that group. There's massive unemployment all around. IMF forecasts 3% decline in world GDP this year. Look at any indicator, and it doesn't look good. And the virus is saying something to us. It is basically testing the total institutional and political resources of each country, because the response is not just a medical response. It's a response to test our ability to create welfare, to reach out and have the right policies in an integrated way. So without much ado, we'll turn to the speakers. And we have a panel, a very distinguished one, that hopefully will cover many of these aspects of the problem. Our first speaker is Dr. Ataur Rahman. And really, none of the speakers need any introduction, but it's important for me to do so. They're all very accomplished and distinguished, none more so than Dr. Ataur Rahman. He's presently Chairman, Prime Minister's National Task Force on Science and Technology. Earlier, he was Chairman, Higher Education Commission, and also Minister for Science and Technology. Dr. Ataur Rahman has received Nishan-e-Pakistan, along with Hilal-e-Pakistan and Sitar-e-Pakistan, and many, many other awards, both within the country and outside. He has a doctorate in chemistry from Cambridge University, and I request Dr. Ataur Rahman to begin his presentation.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I begin with an apology. I'm not an expert on viruses. I did my PhD in organic chemistry from Cambridge 52 years ago. So it's been a few years. And however, I will be talking to you today about coronaviruses. The Ministry of Science and Technology has formed a task force on coronaviruses, which is chaired by me, and we have taken a number of initiatives. Coronaviruses have been known for now about 60 years. They were first discovered in the 1960s. But they were pretty harmless initially, the versions that came up initially. And the lethal forms of coronaviruses came up much later. It was in November 2002 when SARS was found, the severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS as it was known, also found discovered in Guangdong, China, and it caused about 8,000 deaths, 8,000 patients who suffered from it, and about 800 or so people died. So that mortality rate was about 9 or 10%. That was the first lethal form of the coronavirus family, SARS. And then a few years later, in 2012, in Saudi Arabia, came the Middle East respiratory syndrome, which affected about 2,500 persons, but had a much higher mortality of about 37%. So there were about 850 odd deaths. And there were some companies who had begun to look at possibilities of developing vaccines against them, but since these were contained quite quickly, vaccines were never developed against the corona family of viruses. And then came this particular virus in December 2019, starting from Wuhan. And as you have already heard, the statistics are quite horrific. How did it come about? Where did it come from? There are all sorts of conspiracy theories. You may have heard of the version that Abdullah Hussain Harun Saab presented on one of his video recordings. What is true is that in Mount Detrick, Maryland, in August 2019, where there's a military laboratory focusing on bioweapons and virus research, there was a leakage and the laboratory was closed down. August 2019. October 2019, a contingent of about 280 American military sportsmen went to Wuhan, and some of them fell ill. That was October 2019. And then December 2019, the outbreak occurred. As far as science tells us that it probably came from certain variety of bats found near Wuhan. And these viruses have a genetic structure very similar to the viruses found in that bat. And these then migrated to some animals and mutated and then to human beings. That's probably what happened. Although there have been, the Chinese have been blaming the US, and the US has been blaming China for this virus, but there are a lot of conspiracy theories. I don't have time to go into them. One thing that I would like to focus upon is how many people are dying out of it. The death rate is generally said to be around 3 or 4%, but you're looking at people who have died today versus the total number of people who are affected. One should remember that people who are dying today were infected by it 4, 6, or 8 weeks ago. And the number of people infected at that time was much smaller. So the statistics available indicate that out of the cases which are being closed, which means that people who are either recovering fully or dying, the death rate is 21% on average so far. So that is quite horrific if that is correct. So whatever it is, somewhere between 4% and 21% is what the death rate is. So what are we doing in Pakistan? What's going on now, and what is going on internationally? Firstly, we need to understand the structure of the virus. It's an RNA virus, single-stranded RNA. The RNA stands for ribose nucleic acid. Think of a long necklace with about 30,000 beads in it. The beads I'm referring to are molecules, nucleotides. There are about 30,000 of these molecules strung in this necklace. And the structure of the virus in Pakistan was done in a center which I had built up in my father's name, the Jamil Rahman Center for Genomics Research at Karachi University, which has a state-of-the-art gene sequencing facilities. And we found that it had mutated at 9 positions. There were changes in that sequence at 9 positions. So it is not exactly the same virus as was found in Wuhan. We are comparing it with the Wuhan virus. And that may have some implications, although it's too early to say what those implications are. It's quite normal for viruses to mutate. They tend to mutate every 2, 3, 4 weeks, depending on what environment they're in. And we had developed Pakistan's first center for virology, actually in collaboration with the Wuhan Center for Virology, and we have trained a large number of our students in China and also in Germany. And this is now has excellent facilities and infrastructure. And there's a lot of very interesting work which is going on there. So how do we tackle this disease? We don't have a a vaccine. A vaccine will come eventually. I expect that it will take about a year before you have vaccines commercially available, because there's a process through which any development of a vaccine has to go through. So we can rule out vaccines for the immediate future. Will a new drug be available? The answer is no. That can take 8 to 10 years, can cost $5 billion or more in the R&D effort before a new drug goes through the entire development and approval process, even for the highly specialized pharmaceutical companies. So we can rule that out also. That's not an answer. What are we left with? Well, existing drugs. There are many antiviral drugs which are available, and scientists all over the world have been looking at them. There have been trials. You would have heard of Mr. Trump talking about hydroxychloroquine. In fact, in clinical trials in USA, it was found that hydroxychloroquine did not work alone when administered alone. However, in clinical trials recently in France, on about 1,063 patients, they had a 93% success rate for a fast recovery by patients when given a combination of hydroxychloroquine and another antibiotic called azithromycin. So a combination seems to be working, and now they're also looking at different antivirals from a Japanese company as well as from others. So there is some light at the end of the tunnel because of this research. And I expect that within the next 4 weeks, you will have results from many of these clinical trials coming up, and there will be some medicines becoming available from the existing armory of drugs that we have. Our task force has also undertaken clinical trials. A very large clinical trial has been initiated at the University of Health Sciences in Lahore on the hydroxychloroquine azithromycin combination along with some antiviral drugs, and the results for that will also start coming in 8 or 10 days. There is also work going on convalescent plasma, recovering plasma from recovered patients who have suffered from this and then using that. But I see only a limited application of that because of the availability of plasma on a large scale. And also you can't give everybody's plasma to everybody. So that is the other area. The third very interesting area is Chinese herbal drugs. There are certain Chinese herbs which are found to be very effective in coronavirus. And they have been recommended by the provincial and federal government in China for treatment of coronavirus patients. And there is an application pending before DRAP to have these approved for Pakistan, and they have already been approved by DRAP China, so that they can be immediately made available for both prevention and for cure of patients suffering from this disease. So that is one aspect. There's also some interesting work going on isolating purified antibodies. Again, the problem will be large-scale availability, so I don't see immediate application of that. And also on stem cell research. So there are a number of groups in Pakistan involved in this area, and the maximum chance of finding something is from existing drugs which have been FDA approved for other diseases which may work on this. This virus is actually a very interesting virus. It has this necklace that I mentioned, the molecular necklace in the middle, and it has a lipid coating, a phospholipid bilayer, a fatty layer. And it has these, you will have seen on its pictures, these little prongs sticking out. It's called corona, but corona means crown in Latin. And these actually are kind of spikes which penetrate into the human cell, and then inside the RNA then takes over the command and control of the human cell and then starts multiplying. Now, there is growing evidence that this virus is actually attaching itself to hemoglobin your blood has hemoglobin, and that's the carrier of oxygen. Hemoglobin catches oxygen, becomes oxyhemoglobin. This is then carried to the different parts of your body, to all your cells. Oxygen is released, and then it is reconverted to hemoglobin and comes back to the lungs, where it again gets more oxygen. And so this hemoglobin, oxyhemoglobin interaction is vital for our lives and for human survival. So there is growing evidence that one of the ways that it's acting is to attach itself to hemoglobin, prevent the attachment of oxygen, and that is what is causing suffocation, cyanosis, and ultimately death of the patient. So again, scientists are looking at how they can intervene in this mechanism. There are different types of different mutations of viruses. There are 5 main types of coronavirus found, which are causing these infections. In China and in Korea, there were 2 main types, whereas all 5 types are available in the USA and in a few other countries. And so the ones in Pakistan may have undergone some mutations. So we have started now a large project to look at 100 different genomes taken from patients from different parts of the country, and then to determine their structure so that we can get some sense of what changes are taking place, because the structure then has a direct bearing on what points in that structure may be and what approaches we can make towards attacking this virus and towards a cure. One major problem that we are facing in Pakistan is testing. The data that you are being given, I don't believe it, frankly. You're testing only 3,000 or so patients. The testing, you're getting about 30% false negative results. So in fact, people suffering from coronavirus, when they're being tested, is not showing up. The kits that we are using are not matched with the instruments on which they are being used. The instrument is called a PCR. It's a reverse transcriptase PCR machine, which is critical. The kits are only for use on these machines. So the machines themselves, and there are about 24 or 25 machines operational in the country. I have recently given 4 machines to Indus Hospital, recently from my institute, which has increased their capacity from 800 samples per day to about 2,500 samples per day. And I have written a letter to the Vice Chancellors of all universities this morning, saying that they should loan their PCR machines to the hospital which have these facilities, because we are doing only, as I said, about 3,000 or 4,000 tests per day. We should be doing anything between 50,000 to 100,000 tests per day, and tests under high quality assurance conditions to make sure that they are meaningful. At the moment, the kind of tests that they are doing, the results are not very meaningful, and they are not being done under proper conditions. So massive testing. So the key to this problem presently, till the drugs are discovered, are testing massively, doing the test properly, and testing massively, number 1, isolation of the people who have been tested, and then tracing their contacts, so those can also be tested. This is the key: testing, isolation, and tracing. This is the key to, if we want to win this battle against this virus. There are assumptions that we are probably more resistant than others in Pakistan because we live in a polluted environment. Till we have real statistics, we can't say that. It's all because the kind of number of deaths that we are getting from government figures, provincial and federal governments, they are again unreliable. As you can see on television, there are a large number of deaths occurring, and the causes of deaths are not known. They are not doing any testing on the patients who have died. So it's completely dark as far as the data is concerned. So those assumptions that we are more resilient against this virus, in my view, is not correct. We have no data to point towards that. Secondly is the temperature. Will high temperature in the summer help to prevent the growth of virus? Well, there's no evidence at the moment that temperatures of 40 or 45 degrees reduce the rate of virus expansion. In fact, in December or January, when it was summer down south in Australia, there was no reduction in the expansion of the virus. And the other viruses of this family, SARS and MERS, also have not shown any significant effects of environmental temperature changes between 20 to 40 or 45 degrees on its growth pattern. There is a lot of damage is done by what is known as a cytokine storm. This is when you have inflammation, cytokines are released in very large quantities. These are certain types of molecules. And these, if not controlled, can damage cells. So this is, again, there are anti-inflammatory materials which can prevent or reduce the damage caused by the cytokine storm, and that's another area of active research. Ventilators is one issue. Our task force started working with the Pakistan Engineering Council. We advertised, invited proposals for ventilator manufacture in Pakistan. About 46 designs came in. There was a competitive selection process, peer review, and then about a few of these designs have been selected for further development, and the proposal is with DRAP to approve those designs and for prototype manufacture. I have been in very close contact with General Afzal, who is the head of the National Disaster Management Authority. We've had video conferencing, and we are networking with the best scientific labs and institutions, and are working on various aspects, including clinical trials of drugs, including massive increase of testing under controlled conditions, including ventilator manufacture, including kit development. And there have been, at the National University of Science and Technology, there was a kit which has been developed, which is again under DRAP approval, and if it is found to be fine, then we can start manufacturing our own kits. So in the last 4, 5, 6 weeks, there have been a huge amount of activity in Pakistan. Some of it has come out in the press, other activity have not, but it has certainly shown the potential that we have of manufacturing ventilators, kits, and the personal protection devices such as masks, etc. So I think what I'd like to end with is by saying that this is a completely new virus in the way it is behaving. We don't understand enough about it in terms of its structure or in terms of the weak points. The structure, we do understand the sequence within the RNA, what it is, but where are the weak points in the structure which could be attacked? We are also working with the Oxford group, Dr. Sarah Gilbert, and I was talking to, who have developed a vaccine, which again will take another 8 to 12 months before it becomes available, and we are developing possibilities of collaboration with the Oxford University in terms of trials on some of those vaccines in Pakistan. We also have work going on with Denmark about the possibility of virus being conveyed by pregnant mothers to their children, and that's a study which is again being initiated with the Danish universities with Pakistan. This virus is here to stay, in my opinion. It's not going to just disappear. It will subside over a period of time, but it will remain there. In the meanwhile, a vaccine will be developed to control it, but then it can mutate and it can change into a more virulent and even the more dangerous form of a virus. So social distancing, which we have today, will need to be there for many, many months, if not a year, till this virus has been completely controlled, and life will not return to normal for at least the next 1 to 2 years. I was given 20 minutes, and I believe my time is up, so thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, sir. It is a very full treatment. You said you're not an expert, but you are the expert. You are certainly an expert as far as my understanding is concerned. It's a very insightful, knowledgeable presentation. Our next speaker too is equally distinguished from an entirely different field. We have Dr. Nafisa Shah Saba. Welcome to the event, Dr. Saba, and thank you for joining us. She has a stellar political career as a member of National Assembly for the past 12 years. And as far as I understand, elected on a general seat. She was also Nazim of Khairpur district from 2001 and 2007. Dr. Shah is a PhD from Oxford University in social and cultural anthropology. She belongs to a very distinguished political family of Sindh. We look forward to her comments. Dr. Shah, please.
First of all, I'd like to thank the IPR and our host, Ashraf Hayat Saab, for inviting me to this very important discussion. Of course, it has completely overtaken every part of our lives, this invisible enemy, as it's called. I've been asked to speak about the challenge or the response. And of course, because I'm not a technical person, I'm also sitting on the sidelines. I'm neither in the executive in the center, nor am I in the executive in the province. My comments or my remarks or my speaking to this topic will be purely as partly a politician, partly an anthropologist, and whatever else analysis I can gather from it. I'm going to start this discussion on what happened, the events, yesterday's events, which was yesterday's response to this, the exponential spread of the virus and the policy that was taken by the government. As of like yesterday, I think there were 6,000 plus cases. Today's cases I think there are different data and they're constantly being updated. So I may not have the exact figure as of now. And in any case, I would say that this is a guesstimate at best. The data that we are projecting to the world, to WHO, is an absolute guesstimate. That the certainty of it is that it's an absolutely uncertain data. And I think I'm not sure whether it really covers what is the status of present viral spread in Pakistan. So it's around 6,300 cases, and we've had 118 deaths to my knowledge. But I think all of these are conjectural. But even if we take them at face value, it is a very worrying situation. Yesterday's policy measure that was taken across the country, and it applied to all 4 provinces, was softening. I mean, one can call it softening of the lockdown, but I think practically it was opening up of the economy. And it covered a vast number of fields that are going to open up, particularly construction was opened up, packaging, textiles, mines and minerals, e-commerce, and so many different aspects of it. We were doing this at a time that countries around us were extending the lockdowns to this virus. Lockdown as in social distancing measures. Bangladesh extended it, India extended it, Philippines extended it. Bangladesh actually called the army also. So while the world around us was extending lockdowns, we were loosening up to this. So now, this challenge is something that has not really, it occurred in the early 20th century, 1918, and in the form of a Spanish flu. But since then, we haven't had a pandemic of this proportion. So obviously, it tests our, what as a world we are doing. In Pakistan, any disaster that comes, it should really have 2 or 3 aspects that one would look at. For me, as a politician, the most important is leadership. What is your policy towards dealing with the crisis of the virus? And then after that come your preparedness and finally your response. And of course, part of the leadership is how well you're coordinating and uniting the country. And I'm really worried about all these aspects and how we've dealt with them. Throughout, and this is something that it's sort of an intellectual debate, but I think it would summarize the dynamics of how we're responding to this threat in Pakistan. So it's basically the debate is going around because the whole world, whether it's the experts, the scientists, and now largely the politicians, the only trajectory to resolving this issue for now, the only option we have, and as our scientist, Dr. Atar Rahman told us, that there is no known cure. So the only way we can stop or delay the spread is through social distancing. But with the social distancing, there are two different aspects to this. When politicians are deciding on how to resolve this issue or how to curtail or contain or fight with this virus. So on the one hand, we have what is being called a social Darwinism, which is something of like, it's like we are rationalizing the virus. We are saying, well, this is something that's here, and these are the facts that we know. So let's take it in our stride. It's rationalizing means, and something that I think our national leadership, the model that national leadership is following is that of social Darwinism. So one of the first things that we heard from the Prime Minister was that this is a flu, that this just affects old people or sick people. In another instance, he said it affects 1% or 1.5% of the people. And so something that it's nothing to be worried about, which actually meant, again, the social Darwinism philosophy that survival of the fittest, most of us will survive, will pass it, and the rest who don't, well, too bad. So there's this aspect of, and unfortunately, throughout our responses to this, whether it's a scientific or technical responses, social distancing responses, they are somehow, and especially looking at what happened yesterday, are driven by the social Darwinism philosophy, or the outlook, let's say. On the other hand, we have had one province, and I would quote Sindh here, where it's about where the rhetoric or the discourse is on saving lives, which is perhaps, I would also say at this stage, that it's also the other extreme, because I think while going into social Darwinism versus saving lives, so Sindh has been talking about we have to save lives and we have to save every life. And for that, they have, they actually went in for a strong lockdown, and then other provinces followed, and even the center followed in a way. And that based on their looking at this catastrophe as something that needed to be faced through a very strong social distancing measure where every life mattered. Here too, I would say, because it was the other extreme, and the lockdown that we went for on the 22nd, in my view, also perhaps because of this urgency of the matter, the other side of the lockdown was not considered, which meant obviously looking at how you are going to respond to the impact of the lockdown, as in how you're going to deal with hunger, you're going to deal with unemployment, you're going to deal with social unrest. So these were the two different models in the same country that we are looking at. Yesterday was, I would say it was not a resolution, because I felt that in one way we're going towards the social Darwinism model, which I feel is going to be alarming. If we look at the rest of our the viral response, for instance, the viral response, the response to the virus in Pakistan, our first case took place on the 26th of February. And interestingly, despite the fact that two of the largest breakouts happened in the first breakout was, of course, Wuhan, China. And China is a country that is very close to us in every aspect, whether it's economy, whether it's sharing borders, whether it's our foreign policy. China and Pakistan resonate with each other. Similarly, the second country that saw a huge outbreak was Iran. And again, Iran and Pakistan share borders. What is extremely surprising is that despite the close proximity of the two hotspots or epicenters of the virus, and the fact that we have regular exchanges, of course, with both these countries, but moreover of China, it is extremely surprising that we were not prepared enough. Not only that we were prepared enough, that we had the model of China, I mean, in the viral response to the coronavirus spread, there are two models. One is the Chinese model, which is in one way, one would say an extreme model. It's lockdown, it's dictatorial, but it's something that has worked. The other model, again, is close by, which is South Korea, which is extensive testing and tracing, but a softer lockdown. So you do allow a lot of contact and the economy and so on. So we had these two experiences before us. We had two countries that were facing this threat as the earliest, the challenge was along on our borders. And yet, I don't understand as a country, we were not prepared enough. So why I'm saying that, I don't want to be necessarily very critical, but the fact is that the issues before us, the challenge of protecting our borders before us, was something that was not done, I would say, in a way that we could contain the disease. We knew where it was going to come from. It was either going to come from China, largely, or it was going to come from Iran. China, I think we did manage. I think this strategy worked. So I would like to acknowledge, although when we were in the parliament, some of us were panicking and we did want the students to come back, but the government let them stay in there, and they're better adjusted in China. So I would say that perhaps that strategy helped in stopping the disease from coming from the Chinese border. But the other side, Iran, was something that we were not able to handle. And the thousands of people who came from Taftan were allowed to go with very weak controls. There were controls. I'm not saying that they were not there. They were there. But effective quarantine didn't happen, because when we received them in Sindh, we parked them in a quarantine in Sakhar, and a large number of them were infected. And similarly, the other, the spread from within the country and how Pakistan itself became a vector was through this, allowing this huge international gathering, at least one day of it. The first day it was allowed in Punjab and Raiwan, the Tablighi Jamaat gathering. And now that became, I think, the basis of not only the local spread, but also, I believe, the international spread, because there was a lot of international visitors who then went into the Middle East and so on. So in my view, despite having a lot of time, we were not able to protect our borders, and then that led to local transmissions and so on. The other aspect of the preparedness is, of course, your institutional aspects of it. And the institutional mechanisms were set up very early on. I would say there was a coordination committee in the center, which initially is headed by the SAPM. Then the NDMA was there, but I think the NDMA also took a lot of time, and they took a lot of time to build up the stocks, the materials, the testing kits, and so on. And even now, we are not that equipped. The National Command and Coordination came in much later, and one of the main weaknesses in our institutional mechanism was the failure for coordination. And the fact that while dealing with this enemy, we were fighting amongst ourselves. And so it was being dealt with within the political party framework or political, province versus center and so on, and 18th Amendment, and a lot of these discourses which came up, which was very tragic because this shouldn't have had happened at all. So our institutional mechanisms were there, but I think there was a lack of coordination, and that again comes to this leadership issue. And there, the leadership, the ideology of social Darwinism, we'll take it easy. We have to look at the economy. We have to think of the people. We have to think of the hunger, which is of course very, very important. But I feel that it's in a way it's a false dichotomy. The other aspect of preparedness was of course really, I think, looking at our resources. That is, although the 1.2 trillion package that the Prime Minister announced, although it seems large, ostensibly a fair package of our resources, but if you look at the details, a very small part of it covers the poor, and most of it is, some of it is things that government would have done anyway. For instance, it involves a refund for exporters. Now, why did a Corona package need to have a refund for exporters? Procurement of wheat, that is something that would have happened anyway. Why did it need to be put in this? And then things like this interest, there's something that 100 billion for covering, for protecting, for helping the SMEs and in interest payments. Then there's something on electricity and gas payments. What has been postponed is something that this amount will cover. So what actually for the lockdown purposes, what works is two announcements. One is 200 billion for daily wages and 100 billion for Benazir income support, or the new SARS program. So this is something that is, in my view, something that is is the time finished for me, or do I have a little bit of time?
Please go ahead.
I have some time?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. So in my view, the relief package is something that is still because it's only a small part of it that actually covers the people who are affected with this. Of course, the economy is, generally the economy is also affected, but then that should have been given separately. So there could have been an economic package, and then there could have been a relief package, and the economic package could have been something more long-term. So I think this is something that is work in progress. It still needs, but here I do want to say that there is something substantive, and then the government has also tried to transfer some of these resources or promises to the people. But unfortunately, the way it was done was awful. I think it's going to lead to more of a virus spread. So these are some of my, so again, finally to conclude, in the absence of testing, in the absence of our health facilities, we really, the lockdown period that we did, this is the second lockdown we're going into. Unfortunately, we have not used this lockdown to prepare our medical facilities. There are complaints of inadequate PPE kits. There's a large number of people infected already. There are 2 or 3 doctors who've lost their lives already in this, and I think we are still going to go in for a peak very soon. So this lack of preparedness, the lockdown period is often used to prepare world over medical facilities. And unfortunately, I'm not sure that we have used this time, and we haven't really increased our testing capacities to an extent that we should as a country of 200 million. So again, what choices do we have? finally to conclude, again, the same choice of lockdowns. And this, what is really hurting us is this false dichotomy between the social Darwinism and saving lives. I think the answer lies somewhere in between, where we have to be perhaps more categorical in our lockdowns. And at the same time, we have to be more prepared to support those people who are affected by lockdowns, including the economy. What happened yesterday, I felt, and that is something very worrying, that we've opened up our economy to the extent, our agriculture was already open. Exports are going to now open. Our construction is also going to open. So with that, where is the lockdown? It's basically, the lockdown is perhaps your middle classes, the elite, and then your retail. That's where I see the lockdowns being effect. And with that, unfortunately, I see that, I hope that the heat saves us. I hope that the BCG vaccines save us. We can do a lot of hoping. But unfortunately, if we listen to science, then this is not going to take a very pleasant trajectory. And I hope that we can all come together in this and do a course correction. And also learn from each other, sit with the provinces. I think the center has to, everywhere in the world, this coronavirus has made executives, has tested how the executives are exercising their power. This is the time for the executive to exercise its power. Of course, there is a danger in some countries, the danger of like authoritarianism taking over, but there is no other option other than the executive, taking over and then battling with this. And what needs to happen is that we need to battle with it with one narrative, with one voice. And although yesterday, it seems that all the provinces...
You might want to wind up now, please.
At the same time, I think that we really need to be more strong with our social distancing measures, and we need to be more categorical, and we need to see more leadership at the center if we are to defeat the virus. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you indeed. And that was a very good and insightful discussion on a particular perspective. And one of the things that I noticed was that many countries were caught unawares. As the speaker very rightly said, the last pandemic really was in 1918, and no one in their lifetime had experienced anything like it. So even in some of the industrial economies, they were caught unawares. One, I think it was UK, who first thought that a herd, the best response is herd immunity, and they are living to regret that. So yeah, that's our next. Thank you again, Dr. Nafisa Shah. Our next speaker, of course, again needs no introduction. We'll take through the economic morass that this pandemic poses for the whole world. Mr. Humayun Akhtar Khan is an actuary by education, a known political and public figure, elected 4 times to the National Assembly, and has been in the cabinet for almost a decade. He's the spirit behind our institute, the Institute for Policy Reforms, and I request Mr. Humayun Akhtar Khan for his comments. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ashraf Saab, and the speakers and also the other participants. Welcome, everybody. Dr. Ataur Rahman, Dr. Nafisa Shah, Dr. Adnan. So amongst all these doctors, pardon my technical ignorance, but nonetheless, I'll give it a shot. Well, I think that we're facing a crisis like no other, and it affects every country, and in fact, every human being on earth today. And as Dr. Atta has pointed out, there is a hazy uncertainty, and even the experts cannot be firm about the extent and timing of the health and economic crisis. So apart from the health crisis, there is an economic crisis, and I'll be focusing more on that. Let me start by saying that the IMF chief economist has said that the extent of the economic pain and likely revival depends on when the health crisis is over. So the two are very closely linked, the health crisis and the ensuing economic crisis. And as Dr. Atta has said, and that in Pakistan, we do not know at what stage of the epidemic we find ourselves. And that's a very serious statement. The number of cases are not too high. The fatality level too is one of the lowest in the world. But it is hard to say why this is so, or there are myths whether our population has immunity against the virus because of BCG, that a majority of Pakistanis get at birth, or because most of us have suffered from malaria and we have taken anti-malaria drugs. But these, as Dr. Atta said, are not proven. Or whether they are the relatively high temperatures in our countries, or the larger portion of population being young. But all these beg validation and proof. We do not know in Pakistan if the disease would level off or would grow in coming weeks. So in other words, we don't know if we have peaked. We haven't peaked because the numbers continue to increase. There is no general testing, and I was alarmed to find that the testing that is in fact taking place is throwing up a lot of false negatives. But I'm sure that our system is trying to rectify that and increase the footprint and the reliability of the testing. So we very definitely need better data to even begin to forecast the extent and duration of the economic slowdown and its subsequent revival. One thing I'd say that, and I'll talk a bit more about it, poor countries would be hard hit because we all know they're more vulnerable, both with respect to their economies and with respect to their weak health services and structure. And in my opinion, that makes preventive measures to contain the spread of the disease more important in developing countries such as Pakistan. Now, in discussing Pakistan's economy, we all know, and we seem to have forgotten it a bit, that economy in Pakistan for a number of years was already in slowdown. Both the agriculture and industrial sectors were sluggish. In fact, LSM was, large-scale manufacturing was negative, inflation was high, especially of food and utilities. There were further rise in public debt levels, sharp decline in rupee value, investment was hampered by economic slowdown, and the monetary policy was very tight with all its consequences. Of course, the current account had narrowed, but on account of low imports, and the reserve had improved, but primarily on account of high interest rate on T-bills, and with the so-called hot money coming in, which most of it is out now. With continued high external debt servicing, it was already hard to see how long the current account would stay at the level if we were to move towards any kind of an economic revival. So Very definitely, our significant economic troubles have multiplied by the challenge of the lockdown and the cost of spending on health and welfare of the people of this country. The economy is at a virtual standstill. And I'll just tell you a few things that Google has shown. It has shown that in Pakistan, visit to retail stores and recreation places fell by 65%. Between 23rd February and 5th April. And even visits to grocery stores and pharmacies fell by 51%. So the economic activity has fallen considerably. Now let me talk a bit about what's happening globally, and because this will affect Pakistan in its current economy and for any kind of a revival to take place. The IMF has said that the global GDP could shrink by 3%. That's a huge number in 2020. And the IMF thinks it is a crisis worse than the 2008 financial crisis. And the disturbing thing is that the US and Europe, which are the two largest trading partners of Pakistan, would be the hardest hit. And GDP in these countries in 2020 is expected to fall by almost 6% for US and 7.5% for the European Union. That is quite disturbing. But the IMF thinks that the world economy would bounce back in 2021 and it would grow by about 5.8%. But let me caution that forecasts at the present time are marked by extreme uncertainty, and the outcomes could be far worse. The news is that until this week, 90 countries of the world have asked for IMF assistance. And this scale of distressed economies at one time is unprecedented. Now, the IFIs, the international financial institutions, know that national economies will definitely see a growth in their fiscal deficits, and therefore public debt will go through the ceiling, they reach very high levels. Developing economies, many of them with high external debt, already have seen a flight of capital of $90 billion. And that has taken place in Pakistan too. But the good thing is that the IMF has advised member countries that the first priority is to take measures to overcome the health crisis. Even the IMF, no matter what the cost is, we have to overcome the health crisis. And we have to do everything possible to protect the people's lives. And we have to ensure that people who lose jobs must have some minimum level of sustenance. Governments must help with food, income support, access to health, and other basic services. Governments must protect micro and small and medium enterprises and businesses and farmers. And that is the only way to prevent a social and an economic collapse and to move towards any kind of a subsequent revival. This is fundamental. The other good news is that globally, a consensus seems to be emerging internationally for suspension or postponing debt repayments of developing economies. The IMF is offering relief on its obligations, and it has made available $1 trillion in total lending capacity. The World Bank have shown willingness to consider suspension of debt repayment. The United Nations, their interagency task force on financing for development, has issued its FSDR 2020 for preventing a debt crisis, and they have recommended suspending debt repayments from low-income countries. And the International Chamber of Commerce recommends delay in debt repayment. So I'll talk about it a bit later, but I see this, of course, the world has to do this. But I see this, I'm sure we'll survive this crisis, but I see this as a silver lining, and it will create opportunities for Pakistan. So going back to the Pakistan economic situation, in Pakistan, in addition to what I just described, the situation pre-crisis, pre-corona crisis situation, very definitely the demand and supply have both shrunk in Pakistan, and solutions such as lower interest rates for industry or agriculture, and policies to increase investment or improve demand and supply, or manufacturing revival, or debt postponement, project financing. These, it's good that they may be announced now, but they will primarily work after the lockdown begins to end. As I've said, the highest priority for Pakistan should be that the people of Pakistan stay healthy and that human suffering and tragedy is as limited as possible. Because let me say that categorically, there cannot be a normal economic activity if the disease continues to spread. We got to control the disease and, as they say, flatten the curve and start bringing it down. And as Dr. Atta has said, follow this TIT policy of testing, isolation, and tracing. That's the only way to control the spread of the disease. And I'll talk of some measures how we can achieve that. And we very definitely need the right institutional and organizational setup in place. And government will not be able to do it by itself. We will need the civil society, the private sector, and we need funds and delivery mechanisms to cater to our immediate healthcare needs and to the welfare of the people affected by the crisis. And our first focus must be to ensure smooth supplies of medicines, food, and other essentials. These must reach even those who cannot pay for them. That's important, because there will be many who will not be able to pay for them. So let's not wait whether they can reach the convenience stores and the markets, because some of them won't have the money. And we have to reach these people with these life-saving things. And very definitely government will have to redirect funds from other heads. One good thing is that as the interest rates begin to come down, the debt servicing cost and our fiscal budget would, there would be some room there. And I think that most of that room should be used for what I've just described. We also have to ensure continuation of the economic system because it has to be in place when the health crisis is over for it to revive. If there is no economic system, there will be no revival. Revival under those circumstances would be enormously difficult. And so what has happened in Pakistan? Very definitely, Pakistan's growth is drastically reducing. The IMF is saying that, the World Bank is saying that, the State Bank of Pakistan is saying that. Perhaps we are moving towards a sharp recession. Unemployment will increase, has increased. More people are falling below the poverty line. And again, the good thing is the World Bank also, in addition to the IMF, is telling us to make a determined effort to help the vulnerable, such as the unemployed and the small businesses. And nobody is saying that control expenditure in those areas. They're saying spend what you have to, and then we will look after the rest. In Pakistan, inflation will be down despite growth coming down and exports coming down, I feel that the current account deficit will remain in control. That's a good sign. However, oil prices would be volatile, and I do expect more exchange rate volatility, primarily because Pakistan's exchange buffer is essentially gone. And very definitely, we will have to seek recourse to more multilateral and bilateral debt. But fortunately, I think more concessional debt would be available for developing nations, and Pakistan can and should make use of it. Immediate economic measures, I think, number one, as I said, we have to ensure that firms, large and small, stay in business. Government should do whatever it can to avoid bankruptcies in the face of falling demand. And the State Bank has already taken steps for debt relief and provision of low-cost debt. A very important thing we need to worry about is to retain the businesses, and firms should retain employees. And the State Bank has offered soft loans, good loans, to the formal sector to enable them to retain the workforce as long as they can. And I think that is essential, and it will not be done without the support of the government. If an enterprise is not making any money, they won't be able to support the expenditure for too long. So government help is required. But having said that, there are a large number of firms, cottage industry, informal sector, who do not avail credit from the formal sector. And I think that will be a challenge for the State Bank and for the government to reach such people, because they are also a major employer in this country. And they must not close. And somehow we have to reach these people with and make practical solutions for credit to reach such enterprises. And of course, there'll be workers in the informal sector or in the cottage industry. We have already started the ASAS, BISP ASAS support for 12 million people, 12,000 rupees. I think we'll have to expand that, and I'm looking at numbers like 20 million or more. We should be forthcoming with this. I think the Prime Minister was perhaps the first to call for delay in debt repayment. And as I've already discussed, that the world is forthcoming. The international financial institutions and the developed nations are forthcoming. And there are reports that government of Pakistan has sought a rollover of 28 billion of debt falling due within the next 3 years. And some of the measures that I've talked about, that should allow government to redirect budget resources for welfare and the health sectors and to support businesses. Under the rapid financing instrument for urgent balance of payment support, the IMF will disperse very quickly in the next few days $1.4 billion to Pakistan to deal with the pandemic. This will be in addition to the $6 billion EFF, the repayment for which I'm hoping would be relaxed somewhat. Already the IMF has said that any expenditure of the government for controlling the pandemic and its consequences will be over and above the targets which have been set, but I think there'll be further liberalization in meeting those targets. The World Bank and the Asian Development Bank has redirected $1 billion and $1.5 billion respectively for the emergency. And this cushion too must be used on health and safety matters and to keep businesses alive. That's the fundamental thing, health and safety matters and to keep the businesses alive. But having said that, let me say that it is critical that we have a growth program that would ensure sustained growth over the long term. Otherwise, we will come out of the emergency no wiser, with more debt and without the ability to repay. Just recall the happy days of 2002 to 2007, and I think Dr. Atta and I were in the same cabinet then. We received massive levels of concessional aid, debt rescheduling in large amounts, gave us fiscal space. But in 2008, we were back to the IMF with a 40% devaluation. We had not spent the money to improve competitiveness and productivity. And there was a need to build productivity, productive capacity and human capital, and that did not happen. And that must not happen again. There is a lot of discussion about the trade-off between the goals of health and the economy. And in my opinion, let me be very categorical, there is no trade-off. I have been at pains to suggest that there can be no economic recovery without riding over the health crisis. You get rid of the health crisis and then the economic recovery would start. And a discussion about lifting the lockdown is premature. And that is why all international organizations and major economies have been so insistent on this point. And I think a developing nation should rely more on the lockdown, because if it gets out of control, we will have much less capacity than the developed nations to, will be overwhelmed very soon. Our data, as Dr. Atta has said, we need granular data about the spread of the disease based on testing and tracing. We may think of going forward with partial lifting if we are sure about our data. This should be done by having protection protocols created between health experts and the industry when we start moving towards a partial lifting of the lockdown. Again, the Institute for Policy Reforms for several years have called for structural changes in the economy to build manufacturing, to aim for higher value added and to build export competitiveness. And we have recommended a list of measures in the past. And I think that when we go towards a revival and with the IFI relaxed measures in the future, we should go for them. That's a silver lining I see. And if we don't do that, our continued macroeconomic vulnerabilities and dependency on external economies for aid will stay for a long time. Our economy has low rates of saving and investment, and these do not support sustained growth of the economy. Access to credit is a key. We must revive DFI, the Development Financing Institutions in Pakistan. They played a key role in the industrialization during the 1960s to the 1990s. They had provided fixed rate project financing. There are many factors that have contributed to reduction in the size of the manufacturing sector, but I can categorically say that the manufacturing sector has declined in this country after the phasing out of the DFIs in this country. Credit for businesses. One thing the government must try is that as the government's credit needs increase as a result of the crisis, not to crowd out the private sector. The private sector needs credit to revive this economy. The State Bank has taken good measures. They have expanded the LTFF scheme and the ERF scheme. But let me suggest to our friends in the State Bank that increase the overall limit for these two schemes and also the per industry limit, bring it in line with the devaluation of the currency. At least State Bank has announced the turf facility, but that's only for new businesses. And I'd like to suggest my friend, the State Bank governor, that it should be available for BMR too. The existing businesses are much better placed to use the facility to improve their productivity through BMR. One very important factor, our quest for formalizing the economy. Now, formalizing the economy is very important, but let me say candidly that in the last few years, we have moved to the extent that we have brought transactions to a standstill in our country. Transactions are essential for an economy. No transactions means no economy. And there is an urgent need to review this policy. I'm not against this policy, but have this policy, but stagger it, bring it in phases so that the transactions don't come to a standstill. And the revival of the real estate sector, the Prime Minister has announced some measures. It's a vital sector. It's not only vital for the economy because so many subsectors depend on it. It's also vital for the savings that a common individual in this country who is not a master of the stock market and is not getting enough good returns, in fact, getting negative returns from the national savings schemes or from the banks, they can invest in real estate as a secure vehicle. So we have to focus on the real estate sector. These are some of my thoughts. I think this is the basic direction we should take. And with that, I'd like to thank all of you once again.
Thank you indeed. That was a very profound negotiation of the complexities that economic decision makers must face during difficult times. Our next speaker, Adnan Khan, and our final speaker. After that, we will open this to discussion. And I will, after the speaker is done, I will say how you can ask questions. Dr. Adnan Khan is, last but not the least, of course, is a public health researcher with experience in many areas, including disease transmission and prevention. He trained at the Indiana University and the Regenstrief Institute in health research. He did his medicine from Dow Medical. He heads his own firm, Research and Development Solutions, where he leads the technical team for research and evaluations. He's also worked in the health ministry. With extensive experience with working with communities, I thought Dr. Adnan would be an ideal person to have on this panel. Over to you, Dr. Adnan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashraf Saab, and thank you very much to Institute of Policy Reforms. A privilege and a pleasure. So thank you for having me and for such a fine introduction. So, I mean, as we're dealing with this situation, as Professor Atta, Mayus Saab, and Dr. Nafisa have already pointed out, we're dealing with a lot of uncertainties. I mean, so going forward, what are we thinking of? So, well, the big unknown that everybody has echoed and is where's this epidemic going? And one of the questions that I have not seen very much either from scientists or in public media is what is exactly the quantum of the infection? So how many real infections are there, diagnosed or otherwise? We seem to be talking about people we have tested and we know are positive. We have some estimates, but those are also based on our own testing. Why is that important? The question is, I mean, as we heard yesterday that the lockdown was eased, fine. And that could be a good thing or a bad thing, only time can tell. And that question should bother us. Only time can tell is fine, but it needs to be tested. So are we objectively better or worse off in 4 days from today? How do we know? Do we have a measure of infections? Do we have a measure of its effects on people? Do we know how that's changing transmission? And we need to have better ways. I mean, obviously we could do better to get at that, accepted that we have limited capacity. So one of the question is, how are we testing people who are dying for or suspected diseases for corona? And the answer is no. Do we know people getting infected, coming to the hospitals and particularly to ICUs and on ventilators? Are they being tested? Possibly yes, but probably for large measure no. And those are some of the questions that we need to answer. But that's not what Ashraf Saab asked me to come in on. So I'll focus mostly on the social aspects as we see in the, and particularly in the urban laboratory that we help manage here in Rawalpindi. So what are we seeing? We're seeing that there's poor awareness. You all know that. We're seeing that in Hokasu, where we work, large gatherings of people are still happening, maybe about a third as much as you would expect from other times, but still a third of 300,000 people is a lot of people on the street. And even if it's just men of certain age, it's still a lot of people in a very short area. So social distancing, not so much. Why? So people aren't sure what to deal with. It's not as if they don't trust the government or the media. They're indifferent. What they've heard, their life experiences tell them that the government is sometimes on their side, sometimes it's against them, but largely it's irrelevant to them. Their lives go on because they make them happen, and it's not because what anything government is doing. I mean, they go to schools that are private, they go to private sector healthcare providers in large measure. Virtually all of those activities, they buy food and stuff from the private sector. The government has very little to say or do about it, so they don't. They kind of sidestep what the government is. They're kind of indifferent to the presence or absence of government. There is also the factor that most people are so pushed, and this is a relatively poor community. Median income for a family of 6 or 7 is about 32,000 rupees a month. So pushed pretty hard, not enough time, mental space, or even physical or financial space to think about future. So life is day to day. Future planning is really not useful, and it just takes up a lot of time. So you may have heard, "Ab sochte bahut hain, sochne ka kya fayda?" So that is what future planning. So there's not much happening in terms of future, how you're dealing with the future. Life is happening now, and life needs to be dealt. So how's the life happening now? Shops are closed. A lot of businesses are closed. You see a lot of shutters that are down. But having said that, there's some business that's happening. Shutters are pulled up a little bit and things are sold. What is being sold is food. A lot of food is being sold. But to buy food, lots of people need to have income. In Dhokhasu, roughly about half the people earn the they're living on the day-to-day basis, so daily wages. What are they doing? What we hear is it's not starvation for sure, not yet. People resorting to loans from their friends, relatives, sometimes from the gaon. Sometimes even food is coming in from the gaon, but a lot of it is also, we're seeing a lot of welfare, NGOs, and occasionally government, but mostly private sector, philanthropy bringing in food rations and trucks. So, a fairly high reliance on rations being brought in to at least overcome the immediate crisis. People are struggling to pay rents. They're asking their landlords, and over half the people live in rented houses in this urban slum. They're asking for their rents to be deferred. Sometimes their landlord can afford it. A lot of times the landlord is actually living in the same house, and they've rented out one room or so in that same house. Maybe they can't either. So they actually suffer as well, even if they allow the rent to be deferred. So that is happening. Obviously, people are struggling with their children's education in schools. As I said, in Dhokhasu, there are about 3 government schools and 116 private schools. So those 116 private schools that take between 250 and 1,250 in monthly fees. Well, they want to pay their salaries as well. Their teachers are sitting home, but they're getting salaries. So they have expenses. They are asking for salaries. Sometimes they're deferring. Sometimes they're actually reducing those salaries by half. but those things have to be paid, and some families at least have actually withdrawn their children from those schools. So that is how communities are coping with this situation. But the issue is not just this is a crisis and this must be dealt with. Crises come and go. The issue, the underlying issue, is a lack of opportunity. And what is that? So we've talked about resilience, we've talked about health and resilience, we've talked about economic, but what exactly is that? I mean, we think of the current crisis now, but crises come and go, and we need to learn from this crisis. The big question to me that we need to learn is, why are we always reacting? What is the underlying substrate or the situation that we must be dealing with? And the situation is the following. The situation is that it's very difficult to do business. We hear of Dr. Ishrat came out with a wonderful book in, I think, 99 or 2000, and there's now a revision coming out about the Black economy of Pakistan. Well, I think he said something like 2/3 of the economy is Black. Why is it? It's because it's very hard to have a very a white economy. I mean, I operate a company. I know friends who have NGOs. It's very hard to open a bank accounts for companies or particularly NGOs. It's, you have to jump through a lot of hoops. You have to have uncaring and sometimes unending sets of documentations you have to do, and that applies now to the poor people. So what we find is only about 7 to 11% of people in Dokasu have bank accounts privately. 17 to 20% of women don't have CNIC. We ask, and it turns out there's a requirement that NADRA has of a government officer of 17 grade or higher, vouching for you on your form. How many people have access to a grade 17 officer? It turns out there are bribes involved. That means that's an additional burden people have. So these are some of the things that the governments can actually do. So yes, you can act to do some kind of relief measures, but I would say that maybe this is a time to reflect on the crisis and say, what are some of the measures that we can do generally to improve the life of people? And then that would be to really to make life less difficult in terms of regulations, make it easier to people to get CNICs and not have to pay bribes to get vouched. Make it easier to open bank accounts, make it easier to run businesses, to report on their businesses legally without undue issues. And yes, of course, welfare is always going to be there, but in a country where 40%, 39% of the people are below the poverty line and less than 1% of the people have lifestyle that this audience has, you're never going to be able to do a welfare state because it's just not possible. So ease the lives of people, make people a factor in their own lives. Let resilience that we are all looking for come from the people themselves. And that way, when you're talking about the resiliency will be there within the communities and within the poor. We'll not be talking about giving handouts, but we'll be saying, what can we do to actually help people stand on their feet? That's exactly what we are doing. And then one final thing, we rolled out a COVID plan last night. For the federal government, I'm not sure how that applies. I think it will be reflected at least in Punjab, probably in other provinces. But the fact is, Punjab is a very large province. Even Islamabad and Rawalpindi are very large cities. Does a COVID plan of social distancing or whatever else apply the same in Satellite Town as it does in Dokasu? My guess is no. I mean, the kind of things that people of Satellite Town or F7 or F8 can do here are definitely not possible, and it's just not going to happen because people can't afford it. So social distancing will not be happening, like it's not happening to that extent in Dokasu and places like that. And I think we need to understand that just by decreeing a COVID plan is not sufficient. You need to understand what's going on. That means that you have to tailor responses to crises locally. And for that, you have to actually know what's happening at those levels. Maybe it's talking through the local counselors, which at least used to be there, or some other mechanism, but local knowledge for large populations is certainly necessary. And I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Adnan. And I could see that your hands-on experience with community is just so helpful in getting a very individual perspective, but a very, very critical one. Those were 4 high-quality presentations. I received many messages both on chat and on my personal WhatsApp. So let me say a couple of things. First, we're opening now to discussion, to questions. There are some people who've said that they are muted. They will be unmuted soon as they're asked to ask a question or to respond to it. I just want to let you know that there on the participants panel to your right up. By the way, सवाल करने में किसी भी ज़बान में करें, अंग्रेजी, उर्दू या किसी और ज़बान में, because ये सबको अफेक्ट करता है और हर आदमी, हर इंसान को पूछना चाहिए सवाल. सीधे हाथ पर जो पैनल है जिसपे पार्टिसिपेंट्स लिखा हुआ है, उस पर एक रेज हैंड का निशान है. जिसने सवाल करना वो कर ले. कुछ लोगों ने चैट पर मुझे पहले कहा हुआ है और व्हाट्सएप मैसेज पर, उनका मैंने नाम नोट कर दिया. मगर उनके अलावा जिसको सवाल करना है वो रेज हैंड अगर कर दें तो I will know that, to ask you to. What the way to do this is that we will go with 6 or 7, 8 questions at the beginning, and then go back to the speakers to respond. और उसके बाद we will open it again. So अगर पहली दफा आपका नाम नहीं आया तो दोबारा आ जाएगा. I'll try and cover as many as possible. So हम शुरू करेंगे जनरल नदीम लोधी के साथ. We'll start with General Lodi Saab, then we'll go to Dr. Shoaib Sadi. Then I'm taking these names in advance so that the host, technical host, who's going to open your microphone, knows which order to follow. We'll go with General Lodi, Shoaib Sadal, Humaira Jamil Sahaba, Doctor, then Dr. Junaid Zaidi and Danish. And then we will go through another round. Thank you.
जी बहुत शुक्रिया खालिद साहब. मैं बात कर लूं, मेरी आवाज आ रही है? जनरल नईम लोधी
आपकी आवाज आ रही है.
बहुत शुक्रिया. पहली बात तो ये मैं कहना चाहूंगा कि चूंकि ये अभी इवेंट चल रहा है और दुनिया इसके एन बीच में है, तो शायद हम मुकम्मल तौर पे अंदाजा ना लगा सकें कि ये क्या गुल खिलाएगा या क्या चेंजेस लेकर आएगा. लेकिन ये बात तो बिल्कुल यकीनी है कि ये बड़ी प्रोफाउंड जियोपॉलिटिकल और जियो इकोनॉमिक चेंजेस लेकर आएगा. और हम जैसे मुल्कों की स्मार्टनेस इस बात में है कि हम उन चेंजेस को कैसे रिस्पॉन्ड करते हैं और कितनी जल्दी रिस्पॉन्ड करते हैं. ये तो खैर बात की बात है. लेकिन जो 3 लेसन्स जो मैं समझता हूँ फौरी तौर पे हमारे सामने आए हैं, जिसका हमें कुछ ना कुछ करना होगा, उसमें सबसे पहले तो ये है कि जो हमारा एटीट्यूड है, कौमी नेशनल एटीट्यूड, और जो लेवल ऑफ डिसिप्लिन है पब्लिक का, उसको हमें देखना पड़ेगा कि हम किस तरीके से इसको इम्प्रूव करें एजुकेशन के जरिए, ट्रेनिंग के जरिए, क्योंकि आगे जाके हमें मुस्तकबिल में और भी बहुत सारी ऐसी चीज़ों से वास्ता पड़ सकता है जिसमें हमें पब्लिक डिसिप्लिन की ज़रूरत हो और उनके बेहतर चीज़ों को समझने की ज़रूरत हो. एक बात. दूसरी बात यह है कि हमें गवर्नमेंट लेवल पे जो इन्फोर्समेंट एबिलिटी है, रिट ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट, उसको एस्टेब्लिश करने की जो प्रोग्रेस है, उसको देखना पड़ेगा कि या तो आप बात कहिए ना, और अगर आप कहें तो फिर करके दिखाइए. ये बहुत अहम बात है जो हमें देखना पड़ेगा. और इन दोनों, दूसरी बात से खासकर रिलेटेड तीसरी बात है कि एक चीज बिल्कुल वाज़ेह होकर सामने आ गई है कि ये जो डिस्ट्रिक्ट गवर्नमेंट्स का ना होना, इस वक्त हमारे लिए बहुत बड़ा वबाल जान बना है। अगर ये डिस्ट्रिक्ट गवर्नमेंट होती और इफेक्टिव अपनी जगह पर मौजूद होती तो शायद ये वाला काम भी और इस किस्म के बहुत सारे काम हम ज्यादा शायद आसूदगी से और आसानी से कर पाएंगे। तो चूंकि कुछ पॉलिटिशियंस भी हैं जिन्होंने बात भी की है और अब सुन भी रहे होंगे, तो जरूर इस बात पे गौर करें कि ये भी एक ऐसा फैक्टर है जो हमें बड़ा जरूरी हो गया है। बहुत शुक्रिया, थैंक यू।
Thank you, General Saab. Is there anyone in particular you've addressed this question to, or did you want?
ये मेरा कमेंट ही था।
Okay.
बहुत शुक्रिया आपने।
बिल्कुल आपने सही फरमाया। मैं अदनान से कहूँगा कि किसी वक्त इस पर रिस्पॉन्ड कर दें, and anyone else, the speaker can, any speaker may respond, of course. Shoaib Sardan Saab.
And thank you for the panelists. They have made excellent presentations, very insightful. मेरा question है about the confusion which is prevailing about the respective responsibilities of the federal and the provincial governments in dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. And in this context, I would like to refer to the situation of the Constitution before the 18th Amendment. Entry number 22 in the concurrent list as it then existed, it was very clear that prevention of extension from one province to another of infectious or contagious diseases shall rest with the federal government. अब 2010 अप्रैल 2010 के बाद ये रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी कंप्लीटली हमने फेडरेशन से हटा के तो प्रोविंस को ट्रांसफर कर दी। अब हम मुख्तलिफ चीज़ें इस वक्त देख रहे हैं और ज़ाहिर है ये कन्फ्यूजन, जिस भी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी में कन्फ्यूजन हो उसके रिजल्ट्स भी फिर उसी तरह से रहते हैं। अगले दिन मैं सुन रहा था तो सीएम सिंध कह रहे थे कि जी पीएम शुड टेक द डिसीजंस एंड द प्रोविंसेस शुड फॉलो। अब मुझे ये समझ नहीं आती, एंड दिस इज व्हाट आई वुड लाइक टू आस्क द पैनलिस्ट, कि अगर आपकी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनली तो अब है नहीं, तो उसके बाद आप कितने मोटिवेशन और कितनी कमिटमेंट और कितनी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी के साथ इन इश्यूज पे अपने आप को इन्वॉल्व करेंगे? क्योंकि मैं सुनता हूँ अक्सर फेडरल मिनिस्टर वो आराम से कह देते हैं कि जी ये तो 18th अमेंडमेंट के बाद एक प्रोविंशियल रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी है, हमारी तो है ही नहीं। तो दिस इज व्हाट आई वांटेड टू आस्क। थैंक यू वेरी मच वंस अगेन।
थैंक यू शोएब, वेरी पर्टिनेंट। मैं लाइटर वेव में कह रहा हूँ, प्रेसिडेंट ट्रंप कहते हैं कि वो टोटल अथॉरिटी रखते हैं ओवर ऑल स्टेट्स इन द होल कंट्री, और जब उनसे पूछा जाता है भी टेस्टिंग नहीं हो रही है, so he says that's the governor's responsibility. So it's this federalism is a useful tool in the hands of many people. हमारे यहाँ the little bit that of course someone else will answer this, Dr. Nafisa Shah and Humayun Saab can answer this, but जो मेरी थोड़ी बहुत involvement थी उस वक्त this clearly said that spread of disease and epidemics will stay with the federal government, but I left government a very long time ago. Now ask Dr. Humaira Jameel Saba, please. Nadeed, Dr. Humaira Jameel. Humaira Jameel. Yes, we can.
It's really great to be here and enjoyed hearing everybody speak. My question is really to Dr. Rahman, that I would like to share with all of you also, that in this situation which is so unstable, where we can't predict the curve will go, that shouldn't we be working on prophylaxis? Can you hear me?
Of course, yes, go ahead.
I'm saying we should work for preventative things. For instance, the Indian Council of Medical Research has ordered all health workers to be on hydroxychloroquine on a certain protocol. I feel that talk about prevention in the sense of what we can do to stop people. We are not going to be able to stop them from this. We're trying to do this social distancing. It's going to be for a very limited amount of people who can actually stay in their homes. But everybody else is going to be out. Apart from that, there are a lot of things that we can do for the immunity, which is not being talked about. The simplest and cheapest thing is D3. And there is a lot of talk about that how it can protect one. And zinc, being a very commonly available mineral, actually protects you, and it is part of the treatment in treating the coronavirus in a lot of countries. So these are the things that I feel that at least the trial of prophylaxis trial should be started. This is what I want Dr. Ataur Rahman to talk about. All the other materials which were not being like, for instance, injectable. Right. I just want Dr. Atta to really talk about.
Okay, certainly, please, of course. Dr. Junaid Zaidi. Dr. Junaid Zaidi is awake in the middle of the night. He lives in Memphis, Tennessee. And I think his question is also for Dr. Ataur Rahman. Dr. Junaid Zaidi, sir.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity to ask questions. I may look a little bit sleepy because it's 2 o'clock in the morning over here. But anyhow, I'm a pulmonologist and I'm treating COVID patients every day. I'm intubating them, I'm extubating them, I'm on the front line seeing their patients. We are doing testing over here that in US as well. Dr. Ataur Rahman mentioned about the limitation of the testing, and we are having a problem with that over here as well. I just need to make a few comments here. As you mentioned about the cure, there's no definite cure is available. A doctor earlier than me, she mentioned about the zinc, and we are giving it. We are giving zinc, we are giving vitamin C, we are giving azithromycin, hydroxychloroquine, but still, when the patient started to go south, there is nothing which we can do. The people who are getting sick coming to my ICU, 70% of the people who goes on the ventilator are dying. I have lost a 27-year-old who was sitting talking to his wife on the FaceTime, and 3 hours later he was dead. So when they go down, nothing can save them. So these there's a lot of research is going on, and some of the medications he mentioned, Dr. Ataur Rahman. There's one article published in NAGM, remdesivir was one of the medicine. There's another one, tocilizumab, which is a immunological agent. But these are the medications which are like $200 to $300 per day treatment, even in US. So even if the treatment comes, besides hydroxychloroquine is not being proven to be effective, it's going to be very, very expensive. So that's one discussion, that even if we get the treatment, it's going to be very, very hard for us to give the treatment to average person in Pakistan. Second is the ventilator. I think a lot of stress has been done on it. As I mentioned to you, 70% of the people, they die. If people get on the ventilator, we already lost the battle there. You know, the goal is to prevent them from getting to that position. Social distancing is the only thing. He mentioned about the testing. Testing itself, it's a 68% sensitive. It's a lot of things which are involved, how they're taking the swab. I talk to my physicians colleagues. I graduated from Pakistan. I talk to them every day, and the way they are swabbing the nose, that's not the way it's supposed to be done. So no matter how good your PCR machine is, but the person who's at the front line putting this in somebody's nose and not getting it to the right spot, which is actually posterior pharyngeal wall, which is very, very deep. At least you have to push it 3 to 4 inches before you get to that. If they're not getting the sample from that, it's not going to be effective, no matter how many tests you do. So even in US, if we test 3 people, it's going to be 1 false negative is going to come. So there's limitation of the testing as well. The only thing you can do is social distancing. That's the only thing which is economical. As far as I know, it has a lot of other issues with that, but that's the only thing which can prevent the widespread in the Pakistan. One thing I want to mention about the masks, the PPE here. N95 mask, each and every healthcare has to have that, because otherwise they're going to get infected themselves. If they get infected, it takes about 5 to 14 days before they actually get any symptoms. So every other patient they're going to see, they're going to keep infecting them as well. And the second thing is, everyone, now they just issued it. I was looking, I was talking to I was looking on the TV, the New York governor, Andrew Cuomo. He mentioned each and every person in the New York is supposed to wear a mask now. Now, I'm talking about not the N95 mask, which is for your protection. I'm talking about the simple cloth mask, which is extremely cheap. I think if we lift it, Ramadan is coming. I know there's a hot discussion going on about the masjid and everything. I think everybody should consider that they should have to wear a mask if they want to go to a mosque. Otherwise, if one person has it, he's going to cough, he's going to spread it to each and every person. If the massages gets open, which it seems like there's a lot of public pressure to do that. A lot of discussion has been going on about why it was not spread that frequently in Pakistan. There's so many theories. Dr. Mohtaram Humayun Khan mentioned about the BCG vaccine, which is only a very tiny study. Of course, it's a retrospective analysis. We don't know much about it. But one thing which has been proven, there's constant airflow from a house or a place actually decreases the spread of the virus consistently. And that's one of the things they're thinking about, that in the US, UK, and all the developed countries, the virus has spread so much because all these places are centrally air conditioned. And when a person coughs, the droplets of the virus can stay in the air for a long period of time. And the developing countries, like India, Pakistan, because most of the countries, developing countries do not have central air condition, so they have open place, so the wind comes and goes, and that actually helps them. So one suggestions I had, I know time is short, 3 or 4 suggestions I'm going to make. First, if the massages gets open, please ask all the massages to make sure all the prayers they do it, if they can do it in the open area instead of the hall. If they can do it in the the sahan at the back, that would be great. Second, if they can, people are saying that they will be shoulder to shoulder, they're not going to stay away from it. If they can leave once up and just have, because most of the time when somebody coughs or sneezes, it actually goes straight, the virus. If they stay outside and then leave once up and then keep a distance, that's going to help. And everyone who is going to the masjid or anything to go to the work, they have to wear the mask. These are the only 3 things which can prevent it. Otherwise, this virus is hard to control. We have been trying it in US and we have failed miserably. People are more educated here. Education is a very highly rated thing. I think education doesn't matter. There are still people here, the pastors in the churches who refuse to to follow the social distancing guidelines. We believe that all the developed country people are educated, they listen. It has nothing to do with that. If the people, they don't want to listen, it doesn't matter. They have the PhD, they're not going to listen. So these are few things I wanted to say, because I'm on the front line. I'm seeing these patients every day and I'm seeing them dying in front of me, and I feel so helpless when they are dying, and there's nothing I can do about it. Their family cannot be at their bedside. Their 7-year-old, 11-year-old kids, they're talking to them on the FaceTime and saying their goodbyes to the patients. It's heartbreaking. I don't want my countrymen to go through the same process. Please take it very, very seriously and follow the social distancing, because that's the only thing which can protect us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zaidi. That was really both touching and very informative, very practical. I'm sure some of us would want to get in touch with you. I, of course, have his contact. In the first round, our last question will be from Danish. Danish is a student in, I think he said, University of Amsterdam, Netherlands, or somewhere in Netherlands. Danish, please go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. It is. I must first express my gratitude to all the speakers who were so precise in what they were referring to and how they explained the entire situation, and the precise proposals about their answers to this particular problem. I must first make a disclaimer that I am not of medicine background. I happen to be a student of mathematics and theoretical computer science. So medicine is not my forte. But however, viruses also occur in computers, as many might know, and and when it comes to cybersecurity, many methods from cybersecurity are somewhat anonymous. I mean, we can draw some parallels from cybersecurity and the spread of viruses. So we've got a number of academic disciplines which might, give some inspirations to particular solutions for stopping the spread of virus. So we've got this mathematical field called social network theory, which deals with how people are. It deals with the entire social graph of people, of associations, of linking people and their and then in some sort of a mathematical or statistical model in which we can make a probabilistic analysis of what is the probability of this person contracting the virus depending on a certain set of data. And that data is often obtained from sometimes unethical sources, I must add. For example, NSO Group is an Israeli cybersecurity group which has some services which were rather misused some time or some way or the other. However, they are also proposing to use methods to track people and their movements and how it is how it could be used to curb the spread of the virus. And I think Mr. Humayun Akhtar Khan is also very familiar with statistical methods himself, and being an actuarial, and some methods from Bayesian statistics come very much handy over here. So I must add that. Yes, so that's the first comment I wanted to make. That is a comment. And the second comment I wanted to make, which is also very short, I'm going to try it, is that decentralization it's certainly, as we have mentioned, it will help a lot economically, and deurbanization both will be very helpful, as has been discussed very well by and proposed by many of the speakers, especially I think by Mr. Humayun Akhtar Khan. So decentralization and deurbanization are very helpful, and even Dr. Adnan mentioned that, I suppose. The last point I wanted to touch and ask upon, because I also happen to have an interest in national security. So here is my question, which is a question, is that what would Pakistan's national security interest be in the situation where, like, we've got some reports from that India is exporting a lot of ventilators to the United States and the United Kingdom. There have been, I don't know how true those reports are. I might be a little bit misled about them. But it might be true that Israel has developed a vaccine for. Even in the hypothetical situation that they have developed a vaccine. So, what should Pakistan's national security policy be in those terms? And the last point I wanted to make, I will also summarize this. This is very short. Having an association with the telecom sector in Pakistan, I think right now telecommunications and trying to uphold our telecom infrastructure is of tantamount importance, because of remote working. Everyone is remote working, including us. We are on Zoom right now, and right now telecom companies really need to be helped, and it's of utmost importance that our technological and precisely our telecom infrastructure has all the available resources and backing from the government of high priority to ensure not only employment. I mean, employment of other sectors is far larger, but when it comes to remote working and I suppose that telecommunications is central to our economy at this particular point of time. So I just wanted to make that point as well from the telecommunication sector. I think that's all I would say.
Thank you, Danish. And to be in the interest of full disclosure, Danish is also a director of cyber.net. So the telecom part probably comes from there. It's a first-class service provider, at least here in Lahore. I just want to say something before we go to the speaker, that we have a second round. Usme hum jayenge Ambassador Ashraf Jahangir Qazi first. He's been trying to, his connection previously wasn't very good. So we will first try him on Zoom, and if that doesn't work, then I will take him on my cell and see if everyone can hear him from my speaker. After that, we'll go to Tariq Parvez, SV 1133. That's who teaches at UAE. We'll go to Ismail Akad, if he's still there. I saw his comment. He's from the EU delegation in Islamabad. Aisha is also extensively works with the community. And Sagar Didar Bhutto Saab. So first the speakers to respond to all of the questions that we've heard so far, and then we go to the second round. Naveed, sabko unmute kar dein. I see that Atar Rahman Saab is still muted, and I don't know about the others. I'm trying to see. Adnan is muted. Dr. Nafisa Shah is on. Humayun Saab is on. So whoever wants to go first, please.
Was Dr. Atar there?
Okay, Dr. Atar Rahman Saab, the most questions were asked from you.
Ji, thank you very much. Well, firstly, Dr. Humaira Jamil, she asked about emphasis on preventive measures. The answer is, of course, that's very important, provided that the preventive measures that we are using are scientifically proven. And so that's very important, because there are a lot of rumors flying around that this thing works and that thing works. And so if there is proper scientific evidence, for instance, hydroxychloroquine, I mean, many doctors do not advocate that it should be taken as a preventive, because it also has some harmful side effects. So one has to be careful. Zinc, if taken within the limits that are allowed, of course, it won't do any harm, but you have to be careful that you remain within those limits. And I'm not so sure about zinc either, whether it has been shown to prevent. I'm not aware of any studies which have shown that taking zinc prevents the advent of coronavirus. So the scientific evidence in respect of all these is largely missing. And so what we think may be preventive may really be an illusion. So we need to be a little bit careful about that. Secondly, Dr. Junaid Zaidi ne kaha tha ke the treatment is very expensive, and yes, that's true. Many of these treatments when they come, may be very expensive. We are hoping that some of the treatments that may become available based on clinical trials that are going on, and some have actually finished, these may not be expensive. So let's wait and see what happens in terms of what medicines actually emerge. As I said earlier in my talk, I do not see any new medicine being developed for the next few years for this. We'll have to rely on some of the existing medications and the antiviral drugs for the treatment. And the point I thought about on airflow was excellent, and the use of masks, that's very important. And we need to learn from this. So these are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Humayun sir?
जी, मैं बेसिकली जवाब देना चाहूँगा डॉक्टर सडल का कि प्री और पोस्ट 18th अमेंडमेंट किसकी जिम्मेवारी है. बेसिकली हम सब ने मिलके काम करना है, और स्पेसिफिक जिम्मेवारी डॉक्टर साहब आइन की शिक पढ़ के बता रहे थे. लेकिन फेडरल गवर्नमेंट का भी एक डेफिनेट रोल आता है. फेडरल गवर्नमेंट के पास सारी दुनिया से इस पेंडेमिक की इंफॉर्मेशन आ रही है, which it has to pass on to the provinces and whoever is working on this pandemic in Pakistan. Obviously, all kinds of equipment that has to be procured from outside of Pakistan, that is the federal government's responsibility to have it in adequate numbers. What we have talked about today, how to help the people of Pakistan who are suffering as a result of this pandemic, who have to protect themselves and also have to feed their families, that has to come from the federal government, because federal government is the one, whatever room is being made available internationally by the IFIs, the federal government can make avail those opportunities and create, divert the funds already allocated and divert towards many of the things that we have talked about today. So let me just say that we all have responsibility in this country, and nobody should shun its responsibility. Let's all work together.
Thank you, Dr. Nafisa Shah.
मैं भी इसी सवाल का जवाब देना चाहूँगी जो वफाक और सूबों में इस वक्त इश्यूज चल रहे हैं, और जो सवाल था शुभ सदल साहब का, बेसिकली ये तो नेशनल इमरजेंसी है, and there's no two ways about it, that the province and the federation, it comprises of the provinces. It's all basically one unit which comprises of 4 subunits and then the areas. So that there's no way out of outside coordination. A federation is as effective as its units and when it coordinates. And therefore, coordination is of course a federal subject, interprovincial coordination. वो mandate आ जाता है. अगर आप federal legislative lists देख लें first or second, the basic thing is citizenship. Citizenship is a federal subject. I'm a citizen of Pakistan, और मेरे जो rights हैं under the constitution, उससे फिर निकल तो नहीं सकती फेडरेशन. एंड फेडरेशन अगर सूबा का सब्जेक्ट भी है हेल्थ, तो नेशनल इमरजेंसी के हवाले से the federation has to support the provinces. Then again, ports and shipping is a federal subject. Quarantine is a federal subject. Borders is a federal subject. International agreements is a federal subject. Transportation, जो interprovincial transportation है, that's a federal subject. So, there's no way out. And therefore, I emphasized when I was talking about coordination being the essence of, if you want to fight COVID, it has to be through a strong coordinated effort between the federal government and the provinces. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Adnan.
Thank you. So, briefly, General Saab, I completely agree. District government के साथ में responses would have been much more useful. उनके साथ में communities का liaison वगैरह बहुत आसान होता है बनिस्बत ये कि वो provincial या federal government के साथ में communities liaison करें, वो बहुत मुश्किल होता है. So definitely 100% agree, बहुत बेहतर हो सकता है. Dr. साहब ने, Dr. Junaid ने masks.
Are you still connected to the conference?
I am connected. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yes, I can also.
Dr. Junaid ka comments tha about masks, among many other useful comments. Just a little bit of careful about interpreting data. The data that I've seen is ke masks healthcare setting mein definitely zaruri hain, and outside the healthcare setting जो मैंने डेटा देखा है वो ये कहता है कि अगर मैं इन्फेक्टेड हूँ तो मेरा मास्क पहनना बाहर ज़्यादा बेहतर है, उससे I won't transmit to other people. लेकिन अगर मैं इन्फेक्टेड नहीं हूँ और मैं कम्युनिटी में आता हूँ तो उसके ऊपर डेटा इतना है नहीं. उसकी पार्टली वजह ये है कि मास्क कितना वो करता है. ये पार्टिकल जो होता है ये 0.12 माइक्रॉन्स और से थोड़ा छोटा होता है. मास्क जो होते हैं वो क्लॉथ मास्क, ये जो आम सर्जिकल मास्क है ये 300 माइक्रॉन का होता है, और N95 जो होता है वो 0.3 माइक्रॉन्स तक का के पार्टिकल्स को पकड़ लेता है. तो इन एनी केस a large number of virus particles will cross even the best of our masks. Healthcare setting में because आपकी वॉल्यूम इतनी ज़्यादा हो रही होती है पार्टिकल एक्सप्लोजर की, इसलिए वो बहुत ज़्यादा यूजफुल होता है. बट एनीवे सोशल डिस्टेंसिंग अगर मास्क कर रहे हैं तो ठीक है, लेकिन जैसा कि हम देख रहे हैं कि यहाँ पे बेतहाशा कॉस्ट बढ़ रही हैं बिकॉज मास्क शॉर्ट सप्लाई में, मे बी नॉट पुशिंग दैट मच ऑन यूज ऑफ मास्क बाय कॉमन पीपल अगर उनको मुश्किल हो रही है. तीसरी चीज दानिश साहब ने जिक्र किया एपिडेमिक मॉडलिंग का, ये बड़ी इंटरेस्टिंग चीज है. इशू मॉडलिंग के साथ में ये है कि इट्स ओनली एज गुड एज द डेटा. एंड द अदर थिंग दैट वी हैव लर्नड, एटलीस्ट HIV में एक जमाने में 2007-8 तक HIV मॉडलिंग बड़ी हॉट सब्जेक्ट हुआ करती थी. उसके बाद इट लॉस्ट फेवर एंड पार्ट ऑफ इट इज कि वो it's very interesting that most models of epidemics are very good in predicting the past. And you can draw some useful inferences, लेकिन to be very precise कि जी हम can we predict COVID की epidemic going forward for Pakistan or for UK or for US or Rawalpindi, probably not so much. And उसकी कई वजूहात होती हैं. First of all, we don't even know a lot of factors about कि अगर मैं किसी से मैं infected हूँ और बाहर निकल आऊँ, so what would be some of the factors that would determine कि मैं कितने लोगों को इन्फेक्ट करूंगा, वो अभी हमें सही तरह से इस तरह की चीजें मालूम नहीं है. So anyway, and the fact कि is there even an immunity that's happening? We've heard a lot about this herd immunity thing. I've not seen very good data कि there is herd immunity developing in population. So it makes sense कि it will, लेकिन at least अभी हमारे पास information नहीं है. So yes, all of these are very interesting and important tools, and we should all look out for that information. But right now we don't have sufficient information.
Thank you, Adnan. We go to the second round now. As I said to you, that Ambassador Qazi Saab ka connection acha nahi tha. So I'm taking him on my speaker phone, and then I'll try and hold it as close to my laptop as possible, and I hope that you will be able to hear this. Someone should advise if the sound is good enough. One of the speakers, because their voice is, I hope it's so, they're open. After Ashraf Jahangir Qazi Saab will go through a whole slew of questions. It will be Tariq Parvez, Dr. Rizvi, Salim Ranja, and I've already, I think Aisha, Rahmatullah Javed Saab from the Lahore Chamber of Commerce, Bhutto Saab, and if I've missed out, I will cover. So let's first go to Ambassador Qazi, please. You're on the speakerphone.
Yeah, let me just say a few words, and you tell me whether you're hearing me at all. Hello, Bismillah Rahman Rahim. It's a great honor to be invited to participate.
Can one of the speakers tell me if they can hear him?
Oh, I can hear him, Sumayu.
All right.
I can hear him also.
All right. Once again, Bismillah Rahman Rahim.
Dr. Adnan shaking his head.
It's a great pleasure and honor to be invited, and I want to particularly thank Chairman Mayun Khan and my dear friend, Executive Director Ashraf. I unfortunately missed most of the conference right up until now, but I did manage to listen to Dr. Rahman's presentation, which was absolutely brilliant, and a large part of Dr. Nafisa Shah's presentation too. Unfortunately, Mayun Khan and Dr. Adnan Khan, I missed their presentations, but what I wanted to just quickly say was that the presentation or the scientific medical explanation of the crisis, the health crisis that Dr. Adha presented must be the framework within which we sort of counsel our economic policies, our health policies, our other social behavior policies, because at no point should we contradict the consensus that exists among scientists and doctors about how to understand and deal with this. If there is a conflict to some national economy, and of course, both are interdependent, both are essentially important, but it is a shifting balance between the two, and at no point should one completely negate the other, because then the entire purpose will be lost. And I think that point was brought across by the speaker. And when Dr. Nafisa Shah talks about social Darwinism, it's quite similar to what I had recently sort of spoken about in an article of mine in John that came on the 11th, when I talked about a governance of class warfare. And we can see a spectacular example of this happening in the United States right now, and to a lesser extent in many countries of the world, not excluding our own. It is important for the, and given the potential dimensions of this virus, in combination with the massive and even greater existential challenge of climate catastrophe, plus a number of other very fundamental challenges like population growth, etc., we have to move towards the conclusion that a fundamental reconstruct of our politics, our economy, our social is going to be required to get at the roots of this enormous multidimensional crisis that is upon us right now, and not just us, but upon the entire world, our region, etc. That's going to mandate a number of imperatives for our own national policies, foreign policies, neighborhood policies, etc. So this is a comprehensive challenge requiring a comprehensive transformation of our national and external policies for us to deal with. Now, within this, all of this has to be fitted in with the medical scientific consensus about this particular disease. And if we set that aside as just one among many opinions, we will go down the route of disaster. So for the purposes of this particular function, I would see Dr. Abaruman presenting the framework for all the other analysis which have been presented. I mean, I heard from Dr. Nafisa Shah, her assessment of the government's responses, and then I missed out Humayun Khan's, but I'm sure what he emphasized was the need not to allow the economy to crash, where jobs are required. If you don't want to confront people with the choice of dying of disease or of hunger, and then of course this leads automatically to Dr. Adnan Khan talk about the possibility of social unrest. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to listen to it, but I can see social unrest emanating from the immediate consequences of the crisis, and then the longer term the crises of a structure, overall structure that is dysfunctional, and that unless we address these, including the massive comprehensive inequality that pervades our politics, our economics, etc., then we are, as a result of this crisis, there is a silver lining to this enormously black crisis, and that silver lining is that most have to recognize the dysfunctional nature of our governance and to sort of address that as an essential part of being able to implement the medical consensus on what is required of us. I would just...
Thank you, sir. I couldn't agree with you more. That if there is a breakup of the social order, it might this might be that last straw, but there is this continuing political economy and an extortionist state that we've been writing about here in the institute. Tariq Parvez sir, thank you again, Ambassador Qazi. Tariq Parvez sir.
Thank you, Ashraf. Thank you very much for providing me an opportunity to take a break from Netflix, on which I was watching Meghan Markle in Suits. So thank you very much for that. I have a quick question followed by a brief comment and another question. The quick question is that the government, in its report submitted to the Supreme Court, stated that by 25th of April, we're likely to have 50,000 cases of positive cases of coronavirus. So the present rate is very slow. I think we've had only about 6,000 cases so far, luckily. The question is it that the government's calculations were wrong, or is it that we are doing something right, or is it that something else is happening which we don't know? That's the first question. My comment is that about the enforcement of the lockdown. According to the latest analysis, 45% of the transmissions were imported transmissions, but now recently 55% of the transmissions were local transmissions. So the virus is being locally transmitted more now. And in these local transmissions, the major factor is religion. Let me not say religion, but people who believe in a certain version of religion. We've seen an SHO, a female SHO, being beaten up for requesting the namazis not to go into the mosque in Karachi. We've seen another SHO stabbed in Layya for stopping the namazis. We've seen Maulvi Munibur Rahman of the moon sighting fame saying yesterday that they are going to and they're going to violate the lockdown, they're going to have tarawees, and they're going to have this thing. So the point is that in my view, this is another big challenge which is coming up, because as the good doctor from the United States stated, that the most important thing is social distancing. And if if we don't handle this religious element correctly, we might come up with a very, very difficult situation. My point of view, if you ask me, is that the police and the law enforcement agencies need to have a combination of approach, soft approach followed by hard approach. But there are certain people who oppose that we should not go for hard approach. My question to the panelists, I just wanted to have a feel of what the general thinking is, that how should we address the religious factor to ensure effective enforcement of the lockdown. Thank you.
Thank you, Tariq. I think Mufti Munib Saab, probably what's constraining him is the virus is on the earth. If it was on the moon, he would have been able to spot it through his telescope. Danish, the gentleman who spoke, who asked a question from a university in Netherlands, just clarified, and I apologize. I said Director of CyberNet, but he is associated with some other telecom companies. Dr. Rizvi, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Ashraf. It's a great honor to be here today and to listen to such distinguished panel. Well, just to let you know, as to the other panelists as well as those who are taking part, I'm stranded in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and if I have to look for the word, ensconced, isolated, encamped, quarantined, everything here. Why I'm saying this? Because here the mosques are closed. Curfew is imposed in Riyadh. You can't go out. They're already talking about forget about Ramzan and mosques being, because Dr. Zaid said that we should have masks and still, the idea of letting people go and encouraging them to go. In Saudi Arabia at this moment it is off, and I believe same Makkah is under curfew and Medina is also under curfew. So we can take some guidelines from this to help the policymakers and to my fellow Pakistanis to be a little tolerant towards, this concept of isolation and quarantine. These are hard times and we have to cooperate with each other, all right, to protect ourselves. Now, coming back to the questions, I have a question for Dr. Ataur Rahman, who is a fellow Cantab, as I was also in Cambridge. So I'll just, my question is, I heard him saying that the variant of this COVID-19, and there's a very interesting article which has been published, Dr. Ataur Rahman, in Proceedings, which is the US National Academy of Sciences Journal. And it has identified the researchers from your university and mine, from Cambridge, researchers have published, and in that research, they have identified 3 variants. and zeroed in on them, and they are A, B, and C. Variant A takes its root from the bats and pangolins and are mostly affecting USA and least in China. Variant B is Wuhan, mostly in China, and variant C is and China, and variant B is also the Asian countries. And the variant C is, how they have done it is your specialty, not mine. But my question to you is that if it comes to vaccination and therapeutics cure, will the vaccine be universal for all these three mutated variants, A, B, C, or for each they will have to find a new vaccine? Same will be true for the therapeutics. And I will come to Dr. Nafisa after Dr. Taur Rahman has said, but Dr.
No, you'll have to ask now because he will come at the end. All the questions will go.
Right. So for Dr. Nafisa, surprisingly, Dr. Nafisa, for this Cambridge researchers, they have used a technique, the DNA technique, which was used because your subject of research has been anthropology and social culture. I don't know how much you can comment on it. And they have used this research, I'm trying to look at my phone, which is called the mapping of the movements of the prehistoric human population, and they have used DNA for that, right? If you could speak if you can find out from your own research and elaborate on it, because I haven't actually gone deep into this, though I would at times, because it sounds very interesting to me. And also for Dr. Nafisa, how will you think you will impose isolation in places like Dargah and peers like Abdullah Shaghazi? Right, that must be a very important problem for the local governments.
All right, thank you. Thank you for doing this from so far off and taking your time. Next, we'll go to, are you still there, Mr. Ismail Akaj from the EU delegation? What? Unmute कर दें जरा नबी दोनों स्माइल को अनम्यूट कर दें.
Hello?
Yes, you're on, please.
Yes, my question is very quick. It's basically the death rate. So it's very low in Pakistan, and so my question is there a rise in deaths unaccounted for, or deaths attributed to other diseases? Because yeah, the numbers are quite low, while it's maybe easier to say that we are not conducting enough tests. That's why the number of infected is low in Pakistan. Then it should be more difficult to sort of hide might be the wrong word, but hide the death count. That's my question.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Ismail Qureshi, sir.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes.
Okay. I think from the discussion and the remarks made by the erudite panel, and I think most of them are the policy makers in one sense, and also experts in their different areas. I think it appeared to me, what I heard, that the data, and this all said almost unanimously, that the data available to us in Pakistan so far is somewhat incomplete, if not flawed. And that also they're saying that there has to be no trade-off between life and economy. The life must take the precedence. So my actually concern is, and I want them to say what they have to say, that what has been then the basis of the decisions being made by the current policymakers? Is it data, evidence, or just the gut feeling, or what Dr. Shah said, guesstimate? And I think that does give me some concern that what would happen if we are just making decisions on the basis of the guesstimates? And going forward, have we worked out any possible plans or a fallback position in case our current efforts do not work out the way we are looking at. Thank you.
Thank you, Ismail. Excellent question. Well, others were too, but yeah, right up, someone's late. I think we go now to Rahmatullah Javed sir. Rahmatullah Javed sir, please. Lahore Chamber of Commerce. I can't see him here. All right, Aisha. नबील आयशा को अनम्यूट कर दे. Okay, she's on too. So Sagar Bhutto sir. Sagar Bhutto sir is there. उनको unmute कर दें. सागर भुट्टो साहब को अनम्यूट कर दें. भुट्टो साहब, have you muted your, आपने खुद अपने आप को म्यूट तो नहीं किया हुआ है. सलीम राजा साहब प्लीज. Okay, they all seem to have left. I can still see Bhutto sahab, but fortunately we can't get him there. I don't know if the problem is on our end or on some other side. Well, so let's bring this discussion to an end then, and I'll go back to the speakers if they have any last comments to make. In fact, they have to answer the second round, and then I'll thank them all. Thank you, please. Speakers.
May I come in?
Yes, please.
Firstly, the question, is the infection low or is the data flawed? Well, my view is that the data is flawed. We don't know because we're just doing about 3,000 tests a day. As you've heard, about 30% plus of these tests are false negative anyway. So in a country of 22 million, having 2,000 tests only per day, and those also may not be fully relied upon. We are just completely in the dark. We should be doing at least 50 to 100,000 tests per day with proper quality assurance systems in place, right from the collection, the manner in which we collect the swabs, the manner in which we transport them, the manner in which we operate the PCR machines, etc. The whole chain of events must be under quality assurance. So at present, the data is flawed, and if the data is flawed, then the planning is flawed. So that's my first comment. So I have prepared a detailed document and sent it yesterday to both to the Prime Minister as well as to General Afzal, the chairman of NDMA, outlining what we need to do in order for it to be done to magnify the testing, but to do it according to certain established international procedures. We cannot apply the Chinese model. The Korean model is much more, the South Korean model is much more relevant to us, where they had a soft lockdown, which we are having. However, that hinged on a very large number of tests. And that is, unless you have a large number of reliable testing systems operating, the South Korean model will also not work here. And so that is the key. And I think that's what our government needs to focus upon. And that's what I've been emphasizing to the authorities that be. One area that has not come up in the discussions is the source of infections. One thing is the common notes. जो आप notes इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं, पैसे जो आप गिनते हैं, वो पता नहीं कितने हाथों से गुजरते हैं. And that could be a huge source of infection. So we must be very careful how we handle the notes, and we must carefully wash our hands before we then go outwards. The same thing would apply to newspapers. ये छोटी छोटी चीजें हैं लेकिन ये बहुत अहम हैं. Religion, I don't think, is a major cause for expansion here because ज़्यादातर मसाजिद बंद हैं. Whatever Maulanas may say, most of the mosques are lying closed, and so I don't think that is a major issue over here. The generalization of the vaccine, the question, well, it depends on what vaccine. अगर आपके जो वैक्सीन उस बुनियाद पे बनाई हुई है जो तीनों वेरिएंट्स जो हैं जिनका जिक्र किया उनके कॉमन स्ट्रक्चरल फीचर्स के बुनियाद पे बनाई हुई है, and that is what is most likely what will happen, then you will have a vaccine which will be applicable to all the variants found. However, if you have a vaccine developed on a peculiar structural feature of one of the variants, then that vaccine will not be applicable. So it depends, but I do not think you will have, ultimately you will have a vaccine which will be applicable to all the variants. These are my comments, sir. Thank you.
डॉक्टर साहब आपसे हुमैरा जमील ने पूछा है जो हॉस्पिटल्स में कराची in particular death on arrival और cases हुए हैं. Do you know anything about that or any idea?
जो हॉस्पिटल में जो लोग आ रहे हैं इंतकाल करके उसके बारे में पूछ रहे हैं.
Death on arrival.
Yeah, you see, about from the data there about 2/3 of the deaths जो आ रही हैं unaccounted for वो कोरोना से है लेकिन वो किसी उसमें नहीं जा रही. So they are actually not being counted as due to corona because it's a very simple procedure. जो आदमी इंतकाल भी कर जाता है उसका simple आप throat से pharynx से अगर आप swab ले लें so you can still test him for corona. This is not being done routinely. Indus में कर रहे हैं लेकिन generally उसको नहीं कर रहे. So this must be done as a routine ताकि पता चले और उनके ऊपर टेस्टिंग बाकायदा होनी चाहिए वरना there are large number of unaccounted for deaths. The data that you are getting of the number of deaths I think is far too low. The real data is much higher.
Okay, thank you. And Ismail A from EU delegation has said, please stay with English because he's finding us there.
Okay, sorry.
No, you were speaking English, but it's just a general comment. Humayun Saab and then Dr. Nafisa and Adnan.
No, I have just related to the unaccounted for death. I think the gentleman from European Union delegation also asked if the deaths from other causes have risen unusually in the last few months. What does Dr. Atta have to say about that?
Well, I will just add here that usually the deaths due to coronavirus are indirectly due to attack on other organs. It can be the heart which can be affected. It can be other organs that are affected. And so you may find a death which is apparently due to a heart attack, but it is from a patient who was suffering from corona. So there may be a series of deaths which are coming in unless we make it a standard protocol that all people who come in, all deaths that occur, you must test them for COVID. We will not know. So these deaths that are occurring, there is certainly a rise of the number of deaths in Pakistan, and one suspects that this is due to COVID, but many of them are being accounted for other reasons. But COVID acts by acting on other organs, and so those may not be apparent immediately unless you have actually done a swab test on the person who has died.
Yes, sir. Humayun Saab, the Ambassador Qazi had talked about the inequalities in so that's probably something you could address. Other questions as well.
I couldn't hear him very clearly, so could you repeat the question which is related to me?
Yeah, his part was that 2 or 3 things that he had said, that we do not take care of the environment, and this is not just inevitable, but we should expect viruses to emerge on a regular basis, if not faster. That was actually included, if I recall, I think it was your column from last week that you had written for the news also. then his main thrust was that this is such an unfair society, and many of and he mentioned about the Western society as well, that in the last 20, 30 years, with this neoliberal alliance between big business and the political leadership, um, the inequalities could generate social order, and this could be, and the virus and the pandemic could just be that trigger that might take people to the extreme. So if I've summarized it in my own words, that's what he was saying.
Yeah, okay. The environment, as you know, I elaborated in detail in the 2 columns I wrote last week in the news. Very definitely this deforestation and the global warming and environment has a role to play, because the viruses that were remaining confined to various animals are now coming out and spreading than human beings. There's no doubt about that. Now, the issue of the big business and government collaboration, I mean, are we talking of Pakistan? Are we talking of the United States, the Western world, European Union? It's all there. And I think, first of all, I think we should address this question and think more about it after we have come out of this virus from a health point of view and from an economic point of view. Because let's not start settling this issue at this time. This is not the time for it. Right now, let's focus on saving the people of the world and people of our country, and saving the firms of the world and firms of this country. And as we start moving towards a possible revival, and then we might address these questions, very important though they are, as to how we should change this system for future. This is all I would say right now.
Any comment on whether or not social distancing should be enforced on mosques?
Look, when you're asking me, look, let me be candid. Look, in my remarks, after, and I've, these days, staying at home, you get a lot of time to read a lot of stuff and hear a lot of stuff. And also, after hearing the eminent speakers, Dr. Ataur Rahman and others, my belief is that it is more important for developing nations like Pakistan, which have inadequate resources, which have inadequate technical knowledge and inadequate infrastructure, which could very easily be overwhelmed if, God forbid, there is an exponential rise. And whether a rise is exponential or not also is questionable after this morning's discussion, because we really don't know very definitely what the real number of deaths are in Pakistan from this virus, or what the real number of COVID cases are in Pakistan. We don't know that data. So without that, I think the easy things which Dr. Zaidi from Tennessee, I think he mentioned, there are things which doesn't cost too much money, that takes a lot of discipline and enforcement, is the social distancing bit. That is something that can be done easily. Dr. Adnan is questioning the use of masks, but we have a lot of family in the United States, children studying, children working, okay? And the United States, I know that in addition to what Dr. Junaid said, Governor Cuomo has made it mandatory in New York State for people to wear masks. And I think that even though masks in Pakistan are not available, it's very easy to make a mask from cloth. And Dr. Adnan is saying that, of course, it will, a lot of these particles, the smaller ones, would go through. Everybody can't wear an N95 or an N99 mask. That's for healthcare workers. But I think, for example, my staff at home, I've given them 3 or 4 cloth masks, and I've told them that wear it for one day, then wash it, and then wear a fresh one the next day. I would make people wear masks in this country and practice social distancing because as Dr. Atta is saying, we're doing 3,000 tests, about 1/3 are unreliable, and we need to reach the level of 50,000 to 100,000 tests daily in Pakistan and improve the quality and improve the reliability. That must continue, the TIT as I call, but very definitely social distancing and masking, and very clearly based on the inadequacy of data, the question that Ismail Qureshi asked and that Dr. Atta answered, we should be very careful in diluting this lockdown at this stage. I think that may have very devastating consequences.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Nafisa Shah. Can you check your mic if it's unmuted? Dr. Nafisa Shah.
Right. Okay, thank you very much. The question that was, or the comment that was referred to me was Ashraf Jahangir Qazi's. Of course, I enjoy reading his articles. They're really thought-provoking. And I think he's asked some very important questions on what this COVID would do to the way we do business in the global world. I think these are very, very important, and they do merit a debate here. I understand that, right now the imperative is to defeat the virus. But I think at the same time, the hurdles that we are facing in our battle with the virus have to do with a lot with the questions that he's raised. Talking about Pakistan, I think we really have to, we will have to think, or we will have to actually move from a national security state, which we have become, unfortunately, to a social security state. One of the hurdles that we faced, and one of the reasons why the lockdown was not effective, is precisely because we do not have data on our citizens. We do not know the data on how poor we are. We do not have data on our wage earners. We do not have any data on anything, period. And if we are to become a social security state, we have to document every citizen and what he does and whether he or she, what their needs are. And also, of course, the whole politics of equality. We have to move towards equality, towards redistribution. And I think these are very, very important. The other issue that we are learning as we fight the virus is that who is actually on the front line? I don't see, unfortunately, but perhaps that's the nature of our private sector. In the US, the private sector is somewhat being included in the fight. But in Pakistan, it's almost entirely the public sector, especially the doctors. The last meeting that our chief minister in Sindh had with the health practitioners, the private sector refused to take COVID patients. And so we have to go towards strengthening the public sector. We have to go towards strengthening the state. And these are something that, these are probably the lessons learned as we go for post-COVID, or, think how we do business in the world. Also, more cooperation globally. I haven't seen any strong global response for poorer countries. I haven't seen global leadership emerge. Trump is just busy fighting what's happening in the US. So this is again, the present global model is not inclusive, it's not helping with the pandemic like this. So that also has to be thought of. On the other two questions, I didn't get Dr. Rizvi's first question on DNA. I'm not physical anthropologist, I'm a social anthropologist, and I'm not clear about his question on dargahs, whether dargahs are playing a role in transmission, whether, I don't know. As far as religion and society and religion, or how religion is implicated in the present spread, I wouldn't talk about religion, but I would talk about religious and cultural and practices. And all practices that have or encourage or promote gatherings will, of course, help in spreading the disease. On Ismail Qureshi Saab's question on our decision making, on what it's based, unfortunately, I think, sadly, the decisions in the center are based not on science, I would say that. They are based more on politics, compulsions of politics, on lobbies, as we saw in how the lockdown, the issue about lockdown was dealt with in the center. I wish in the UK, the game changer with decision making was an Imperial College report on COVID. And that opened up the eyes of UK elite or UK cabinet, which was actually going for herd immunity. They were talking about more the social Darwinism or the Darwinism part, and that was that was the basis of their policy. And then it was the Imperial College data or report that opened their eyes, and then they changed the way they were dealing with the COVID. So I wish we would listen to scientists. I wish we would listen to our virologists, if we have them. I wish we would listen to our data analytics. I wish we would listen more to projections. I'm not sure if there is a war cabinet in the center, if there is a war cabinet, if data is being analyzed, and if we have any projections, which is the basis of our decision making. As far as the present data is concerned, I think it's an absolute fiction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We thought that this can't go more than 3 hours, so we preserved it until 2 o'clock our time. So we have about 10 minutes before it closes, but we will stay until then. Adnan, I have to ask you a favor. There is one questioner who has said that she wants to ask a very quick question from Dr. Ataur Rahman. We will let you ask, then yourself, and then we'll have Ataur Rahman Saab answer that question. Amreen, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. I don't think we can hear you. Are you unmuted? Try again. No? All right, why don't I read out her question from the chat? You can keep trying to speak, and if we hear you, we let you speak. She said that Dr. Ataur Rahman talked about the South Korean example. Yeah, I think we can hear you now. No, we can't. He talked about the South Korean example, but we do not have the intense testing capacity. Accompanying that was intense, very, very intense testing capacity. They had drive-in tests open to everyone, the whole population. If we do follow, if we do follow the South Korean model, we need. Let me just read it out from here. If we don't have the capacity of South Korea to test, then why don't we follow the Chinese example? And also, shouldn't we be relying on medical experts and follow the path of strict social distancing and a more strict lockdown? So Adnan will go first, and then I'll let Dr. Ataur Rahman do this.
Thank you. So, I mean, I think I'll just speak about one aspect. We've talked about that data nahi hai. One of the things you do, you almost never have good data about epidemics unless you have good systems in place. The way you do it is आप एक चीज कहते हैं sentinel surveillance, and इस सूरत हाल में what that would be is you basically set up to receive data from at least a major hospital. So you have people calling daily, at least to the big hospital in big cities, and saying, "Look, how many cases are you getting for that meet this this criteria of symptoms?" And ditto goes for your ICUs, and ditto goes for your ventilators. And then I would actually say that absolutely you have to test the extremely sick in those hospitals, including all the unexplained deaths that come in. The question about what happens if the person comes in with a heart attack, but they test for corona, it's a little bit more complicated. Italy, actually, for example, counts all such deaths as a corona death. Germany, for example, and the rest of the world actually does not. There are a minority of countries that actually allocate all deaths among corona patients as corona deaths. Only a few do. So I think I would probably do sentinel surveillance by the government agencies, whoever is responding and looking at data for sure, and then testing of sick patients and deaths on arrivals. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Atar Rahman sir, about the South Korean example.
Yes, you see, the Chinese example, of course, worked very well, but it was a very strict lockdown, and that would have its own cost in terms of, you know, there are many poor people, they work on a day-to-day basis, they have daily earners. If we have a complete lockdown, ideally that is what we should be doing, but we can't afford it. We are a poor country and we can't feed about 80 million people sitting at home. So practically it's not possible. So the way that I would look at it is to identify hotspots across the country and have strict lockdowns in those hotspots. Within, it could be different hotspots within a city. It could be a different hotspot within certain localities, but a total entire lockdown for 6 weeks or 8 weeks is not an option, I don't think. I would like to make one comment here about the masks, that the question. I agree with what Adnan was saying. The fabric masks, the dimensions of those fabric masks freely allow viruses to pass through. It's only the N95 masks that offer protection. So the masks that the masks that we are wearing are, they're not protecting you. They are protecting others to some extent, because if you sneeze and if you cough, then many of the liquid droplets that you come out will be absorbed in that mask. So these are largely for protecting others, but not for protecting you. They offer almost zero protectors to you if you're wearing a fabric mask. If you're wearing an N95 mask, then it does protect you, but only if you are wearing it properly. If you are breathing air from the sides and so on, often people just put one strand around their ears and then they're breathing from outside, then it's also not protecting you. It has to be worn really properly with tightly around so that you're only breathing air through it. So I thought I should just clarify that bit about the masks have to be worn correctly, and the normal masks that you're wearing, the fabric masks, will protect others. They will offer zero protection to you.
Okay, that's on that ringing endorsement for fabric masks. Any of the other speakers would want to say one last comment, or should I close this meeting by Humayun Saab, Nafisa Saba, or Adnan? Okay, I think the issue of lockdown is associated with what Ashraf Jahangir Qazi also said. It's the political economy at work. And I think Nafisa Shah Saba also referred to lobbies influencing decision making. I'm not saying that that's so in Pakistan. It could be, but it's certainly an issue in other parts of the world. Not to have a lockdown and not being able to provide meals to the poor who can't access meals Well, government has to start acting as government. If we can develop sophisticated weaponry, we can also provide means to the people of Pakistan. That should be something for subsequent discussion. I thank you very much, all participants, but especially the 4 speakers. Superb session, and thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you, Nabi.